So it's a great pleasure to welcome you to EPFL Pavilions and to celebrate cyber-physical architecture in real time. The Pavilions is an amplifier for art and science in society, and it blends experimental curatorship and contemporary aesthetics with open science, digital humanism, and emerging technologies. And welcome to the Symposium of Cyber-Physical. So my name is Sarah Kenderdine. I'm the director of EPFL Pavilions and of the Laboratory for Experimental Museology. So over the past 7 years, the Pavilions has been investigating this relationship between art and science in dialogue with laboratories, researchers, and artists. Our exhibitions and programs evolve in tandem with scientific innovation and societal challenges, engaging visionary perspectives on our contemporaneity. And recent examples of our exhibitions include the nature of robotics and its expanded field, deepfakes, art and its double, cosmos archaeology, explorations in time and space, lighten up on biology and time, and today cyber-physical, which was inaugurated last night that many of you know. It's a quadruplet of installations by the artistic and architectural duo Uwe Rieger and Yinan. And this exhibition embodies new architectural expressions challenging our traditional notions of space, information, and design. Emblematic of a cybernetic paradigm that emerged at the birth of the information age, the installations in this exhibition embody concepts of architectural objects as communication phenomena. Cybernetic thinking was born from the basic premise that several artificial and natural phenomena, from computing machines to the functioning of social groups, can be explained as information processing systems. These investigations include the use of topological and non-Euclidean geometries and the definition of new design methods grounded in genetic, kinetic, and nonlinear systems. Architectural discourses and techniques have constructed buildings as programmable artifacts and as semi-organic machines ruled by the same principles as living systems that could eventually become self-creating. Cyber-physical humanizes conceptions of buildings as dynamic systems, as devices highly integrated with the environment, as communicational and sentient artifacts ruled by flows of information. Crucially, the performative installations in cyber-physical are an expression of the exploration of the logic of connectivity in our contemporary era. And to this symposium, we have a whole series of very diverse speakers to share their cutting-edge practices on the form, relevance, and feasibility of these digital extensions of our realities. There are 4 themes: blurring humans, harmonious AI, intimate hybrids, and markets in motion. But first, we'll begin with an introduction to the Light Series installations that form the exhibition by Uwe and Yinan. And I'll just introduce them both here. Uwe is an architect originally from Germany who, since 2006, was a professor at the is a professor at the University of Auckland, where he established the ArtSec Lab for Cyber-Physical Design and Interactive Systems. His projects have been exhibited at renowned institutions such as the National Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa, the Museum of Modern Art in Barcelona, the National Museum in Indonesia, Venice Biennale, the World Expo, the IBA, and the Ars Electronica Festival. And I'll also introduce Yinan now. She's a digital artist and programmer and research associate at the ArtSec Lab, while also teaching globally. Her research focuses on creative AI and responsive environments, employing architectural scale prototypes and performances and with a prolific series of installations at major venues worldwide. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the introduction, Sarah. It's really a great honor to be here at EPFL Pavilions. Yinan explained it already yesterday in the opening speech. It's not just the concept of EPFL Pavilions operating at the intersection of science, art, and society, but also the building somehow seems to be perfectly fitting for exactly 4 installations which we always wanted to bring together and exhibit. So we'll be giving a little overview of our background, of our intentions. Yinan will then more in detail talk about the light series and exemplary here, picking the light sense project to explain core principles. Fine. Okay, so yeah, thank you very much. We are from the University of Auckland, and where we're running the ArcSec Lab. And so our aim is to explore a new generation of responsive architecture by merging the dynamic properties of virtual and digital worlds with the traditional qualities, the multisensory qualities of architecture and locations. Specific to our lab is the use of large-scale installations, on one hand to test ideas, but on the other hand to communicate ideas. And we are embedding our teaching in the development of these ideas, and often courses then develop to research projects or to thesis projects, to postgrad projects, and then to research projects. We are operating on all scales, so it goes from objects to furniture scale to architecture and even urban scales. Behind this sits the principle of merging digital and physical worlds together. So our approach is to, as a design process, to take both worlds equally from the beginning, and through a process of calibrating and fusing them together, create new environments which are then being monitored through environmental sensors, sent to network computing. This puts it out to digital actuators, and this real-time feedback loop creates what we are calling cyber-physical architecture. So here, referring to systems where the digital influences the physical and vice versa. A good example is one of our teaching projects, hybrid objects, where students were developing objects which were partially physical, partially digital. So here using the meta glasses, and this object really has a feedback loop in there. It explains you how to assemble this. It looks a little bit like an artificial heart or like a medical object, how this is being assembled. If you do this in the right form, then it illuminates at the end and the vibration motor is being activated. These type of experiments then lead to further experiments where we also are going into the material itself. This is a thesis project from one of our students, Cyber Bio, using again the HoloLens, but here connecting it to biomaterials in this case algae, which have sensors embedded. They have actuators that are able to feed a sugar liquid to this material, and the whole environment is simply a experimental laboratory environment, completely controlled by the HoloLens, so temperatures, but also the information of the material itself. He went as far as the material being able to recognize touch, or you could also talk to the material in order to ask how it is and if it's required, no liquids. That then is connected to various other digital tools, in this case here what we just saw, microscopes that allow us to investigate these materials in closer proximity. So what we are after is really creating environments where the digital is not just an add-on, but really a part of this setup, and it goes from large scale to materials itself. Yinan, I'll hand over to you to introduce the light series.
The light series are the 4 installations in Pavilion B. Today I'll be mostly picking light sense to talk more in depth about. So with the light sense project, we were exploring a new generation of responsive architecture. It invites the audience to engage in intimate and meaningful interaction with a living architectural body. The kinetic construction combines a lightweight structure with 3D holographic animations of its digital twin. And at the core of this installation sits a neural network that facilitates verbal communication with the audience. This was trained on 60,000 poems that provide vocabulary, syntax, and context. And it is programmed to actively engage, lead, and sustain conversations. It's a 12-meter long kinetic construction and joined by a rotational axis suspended from the ceiling. It is controlled by 2 motor-controlled 5 kg weights that move alongside a rail to produce the movement. LightSense uses the same anaglyph stereoscopic principle as the other installations. However, a particular component here is the rendering principle that allows us to project images on a moving and a folding target screen. Through its poetic nature, it offers opinion and an emotional interpretation of the dialogue, which in turn triggers emotional and perceptive responses in the audience. Analyzing the emotional tenor of this conversation, the system can transform into a series of architectural volumes and immerse the visitors in follies of love, of anger, curiosity, and joy. And only in combination with the dynamic audiovisual animations, the hybrid folly of emotion becomes complete. Visitors can communicate with LightSense AI system through an on-site microphone, and the generative language model produces a response in the form of a poem which maps the interaction with the user against emotional proximity values. We have here a short 1-minute video for those that haven't explored the exhibition yet. Oh, sound.
Sound.
Built out of 60,000. Hello, LightSense. I am one of your creators. Do you know that you've been built out of 60,000 poems?
The people are the creators of our happiness. They are the light that makes the people happy. Creators is interesting. Tell me more.
Are you a human or a machine?
Is there any comfort in being a machine?
If machines are new to you, do you think maybe you're more of a cyborg then?
The cyborg is unsure of his place in the human race.
Do you know that you are an architectural installation?
I like to think of myself as one of the creators of a new concept, an installation, an idea, an experiment, an invitation to explore new worlds.
So equally, it is possible to link LightSense's twin to a communication platform such as Zoom or a 360 live video conferencing platform. And this allows us to basically exhibit the installation in a decentralized manner, independent of its location, and enables visitors from all around the world to talk to the on-site visitors as well. And our next presentation of this will be at SIGGRAPH Asia in Sydney, where audience there will be transported to pavilions and will be able to interact with the installation using VR glasses and seeing how the physical structure transforms. Thank you. I'll hand back to you to talk about the next applied project.
Okay, yeah, so we've been running through a series of projects here. The last ones and the ones that you see are our artistic type of investigations that we're doing, but as architects we're also interested, of course, in doing more applied applications. And what we are learning from these installations, we are then trying to apply in a more functional context. A good example is XR tumor evolution, which was developed in collaboration with our Department for Medical and Health Science, research, and the business school. The background to this is that the oncology department came to us to ask if it was possible to develop something that allows cancer researchers to communicate more efficiently with each other. Interestingly, so cancer research consists of many different branches, and each of them have their own way of communicating their data and their information. It's actually quite difficult with them or in between them to communicate. And we figured this is a typical architectural problem. If we can solve this in a spatial arrangement, and what we developed was a new prototypical research space. The request was for 10 researchers to meet, which truly combines the digital information with the architecture itself, and we deliberately here then are using connecting different tools, digital tools like tablets or touch screens, but also are integrating just normal traditional information tools like prints or whiteboards in order to optimize communication between these researchers. The background to this is that the oncology department had quite a precious gift from a cancer patient who donated the medical data of her cancer, which had grown over a nine-year period until she died, to develop this for a scientific project. So what we had was an enormous amount of data that we were able to bring together in this new form and in this multimodal form, which in its central position was of course put together as a model of the patient. And here it allowed us, of course, to move forward and backwards in time to simulate treatment processes or to identify treatment processes, and to also link this to other data which were then arranged spatially. And this is where the architecture comes into space. So really the organization of the information correlates with the architectural space itself, next to just being also a space that optimizes viewing for the HoloLens by having optimized colors in the background and a certain amount of shading. The next part of this project will be to link this to external collaborators and find ways to connect this to more efficient ways to bring in data from medical digital imaging. Here now, just to summarize it, we've picked a graphic from Gilles Blanke, who is the director, science director at Meta Labs, and we've transformed it in the architectural context. So typically architecture is placed when humans are manipulating the world. And this is where we find urban design, architecture, interior design. The other area which I think is quite well known is the intersection between the computer and the human-computer interaction. And this is where we find in architecture the CAD and the BIM programs, the simulation programs, and the visualization programs. Now, the intersection between the world and the computer, this is where we've got the actuators and the sensors that are operating in between these worlds. In architecture, this is the area of fabrication, assembly, survey, and the control of buildings. So what interests us specifically is the intersection of these three circles. And here we believe this is really the center of future architectural practice, not only architectural practice, because we believe that the exploration of this new center is something that can't be just done from one principle, from one discipline by itself. It needs the exploration from multiple sides in order to make sense and in order to discover really new ideas, rather than just applying technology to existing concepts and to existing objects in order to optimize them. So this is also why we are really quite excited about this symposium here today, to hear from you, from different sides, how you are approaching this field at the intersection of digital technologies and the world. For us as architects, we see a specific interesting area in AI. Now, through ChatGPT and Midjourney, of course, there's this discussion of what can we do, and it's also fantastic that it's so fast. But that is still on the simulation side, what we have always done. What we think starts to become interesting is that we can use AI to embed it in our buildings, to give our buildings a character and to give it identity. And I think this is what actually differentiates buildings from architecture. A building is just something functional which can be optimized. Architecture becomes something, a building becomes architecture if it becomes emotional, if it attaches to you. And all of a sudden here as designers through AI, we have the possibility to use character and behavior as an additional design tool within the structures that we are developing. So, we hope you will have time to look through the exhibition. I think there's a guided tour scheduled as well, and we are now looking especially forward to the symposium and to the 4 different sessions that we will be running through. Thank you very much. And I'm just staying here on stage straight away because I was selected to host the first session, Blurring Humans. So this session is about looking at the intersection between human and machines and digital technologies, and we are doing this from different perspectives, from neuroscience perspectives, from the nanotech technology perspective, from the perspective of a choreographer and dancer, and from an architect. We've got 4 speakers here with us today. Professor Olaf Blanke from EPFL, Professor Adrian Ionescu from EPFL. Now, Adrian Jobin, the choreographer, I believe has called in and said he will not be able to come, but I believe we are able to, at least at his slot, place a 1-minute video and of his work. And also you're invited to join a performance that is going to be presented remotely, presented over at the Rolex buildings tomorrow at 7 p.m. from his lab. The last speaker, Professor Matthias Kohler from ETH Zurich. I'll announce the first one, Professor Olaf Blanke from EPFL. He is a professor, the director of the Center for Neuroprosthetics, and the director of the Laboratory for Cognitive Neuroscience here at EPFL. And we were briefly talking, and he said he's actually going to present not necessarily on his own work, taking tools to look into the human brain, but how he was approached by different artists and creatives to use their technology for new developments. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and was just mentioned, I think my talk will fit quite nicely on human-computer interactions, and I related concepts, but how it is used in my lab I'm a neuroscientist, and what I hope to talk to you about is, or a key topic is the self, and really interactions crossing boundaries between neuroscience. Crossing boundaries between these three domains: science, technology, and art. So we're interested in the self. We're not the first ones to be interested in the self. Know thyself, a Delphic maxim, which used to be above the Temple of Apollo in Delphi. So it's an old notion. I put it here because it has knowing, so cognitive aspects of the self. Traditionally, the self has been approached as a topic, as an experience of knowledge. Of course, Ovid's Narcissus, very much the same. The recognition of the self seems to have been, or is the topic of that short poem. He does not recognize himself, notoriously falls in love. The Echo is a similar thing. The same happens not just for his visual reflection, but also for his self-voice recognition. Descartes, much later, already 400 years ago, the most famous statement, I guess, in Western philosophy, the modern times, cogito ergo sum. So he links self-cognition, the cogito, with being, with a sum, but he still links it to cognitive aspects. I think, therefore I am. So I'm going to talk also about the self, also about self-consciousness, very briefly this morning, but I'm going to focus on what's here on the right. So what we argue and what comes from biology and neuroscience is that next to this high-level self that we can criticize, that we may like, that you, when you look in the mirror, you're not happy in the morning, what you're seeing, that kind of self, I'm not going to talk about, a cognitive self that we can refer to by memory, by language, by thought, or socially, like in this room today, but more on a bodily self. What is shown, for example, on the image that you can see here, it's something like a mere first-person perspective that I'm having right now. It's also a very basic form of self-recognition. Another form of bodily self, so cognitive self, Descartes, Delphi on one side, and then there's this bodily self that I'm going to talk about. As a key example, you can take phantom limbs. So after amputation, as you can see on the right, following limb amputation, people will perceive that the limb is still there. It's very different than Narcissus, very different than knowing yourself. It is a basic experience about a bodily self. This is my limb, if I were the amputee that is felt. And we're not working on phantom limbs. We have also done a bit of work. We're working on something we think is more interesting, phantom bodies. Because similar processes that can happen for a finger, for a limb, for a foot, can also happen for an entire body. And in out-of-body experiences, this is experienced by many people around the world, 5% of the general population. You can feel, as the image shows, although you're supine on your back, you feel a second body, a self, at this elevated position. We have a long time ago had a chance, opportunity to observe and induce this by direct brain manipulation. So not a chance observation, but stimulating that part on the left that is shown in yellow, those two electrodes. If we stimulated them, a patient in that case was experiencing, like turning a light on and off, an out-of-body experience, meaning the perspective, if I were to have it right now, to be under the ceiling, to be looking down, and to see myself and you from that different perspective. There's not much time this morning, so and I wanted to rather focus, as Uwe said, on the artist encounters over the last couple of years. So how do you bring this to the research laboratory? How can we test this phantom body, this out-of-body experience scenario, using technology? So we used, you can see, it's a rather a simple head-mounted display VR at the time. We had a camera placed 2 meters behind, and then what the camera sees is projected to the head-mounted display. So this is our human subject sees a copy of himself, an avatar, if you want, a virtual body standing in front of him or her. And then what we did is we applied a tactile cue, a touch stimulus. I think very important also for cyber-physical explorations, that the bodily sensations are somehow also part of this continuous information flow. And so there's a conflict for the brain to resolve, because there's a touch that is applied here on my back if I were the subject, but it is seen 2 meters in front. So how does the brain resolve this? Because normally when I feel touch and I look down, I see it exactly where it is in outer and external space. However, when you do this for certain for about 1 minute or 2 minutes, you can override a lifelong experience. So this avatar that is seen in front is perceived as my body. And you can measure this, what we do in the lab, and we've done over 1,000, not 1,000 studies, but several studies with over 1,000 healthy participants. And you can quantify how strong people identify with the avatar that you see. And you can then do many control conditions, which I won't go into detail. And people actually start projecting self-location. So their center of awareness is not located where it should be, where it is, I hope, this morning with all of you sitting on your chair at the moment, but it seems to be projected 2 meters in front. So the brain, after 2 minutes of stimulation, projects in this way. And of course, our main business day to day is how is the brain involved in generating this, but I will not bore you with this. But what we think is this phantom body, what this phantom body is actually this bodily self. It's a representation by the brain, a conscious representation of the brain, creating us as a whole, not as a phantom finger or limb, but as a whole, very basic representation of ourselves. And I think we may also share this with animals. So animals, a mouse would have such a conscious self-representation. So now just a couple of videos and explorations here. The first one is with Nicole Oettinger, a painter, media artist who spent about a year in the lab about a decade ago, and I'm presenting just her video ergo sum series. You see again the camera here, and she explored drawing. She had an interest in self-portraiture from whenever she started becoming an artist. And so the same illusion or virtual reality setup that I presented to you, she used it and created self-portraits while she was immersed in these scenarios. I think the video shows it much better if it wants to start. So this is an image, a back view. This is what the camera sees, and Nicole is wearing the head-mounted display. You see once in a while she moves the head to the right so that she sees more aspects of herself, but she doesn't draw. She draws blindly if you want, but through this lens. Time is short, so I will continue. So this is one of the many drawings that she did, and there was this doubling, obviously, that she could also feel, because the camera, the self, is somehow behind, observing yourself while you're painting, but at the same time she's a picture filmed, and then she's creating, if you want, the third picture, which is what you see in front. With Isabella Pasqualini, she was a PhD student in the lab, co-directed with architecture, and Isabella was inspired here by Bruce Naumann's work, to see what happens if around the avatar setup that I presented to you, we change the space, small space, big space, narrow spaces, like famously in these corridor installations from the 70s. And she's interested as an artist, how do we feel, even though it's not real, but how can we feel certain environments that we're seeing and where we project the avatar into it. Again, I won't have time to go into details, but I think what was interesting here, she also did experiments. So she designed the scenarios, but she also tested healthy subjects, participants in her built environments. She also continued designing new spaces. It looks a bit scary maybe here on the right, but where people are projected into the walls. And what we also used here, there was a new form of technology that we had developed where interoceptive, so-called interoceptive representations, breathing rhythms, and also heartbeats could be projected onto the avatar and into similar illusions. She also explored this in built environments. This is a work together with Mark Boulos, and so installation artist, media artist, who's in the US, the professor in the US, and I think the image shows it as well. So he named it Echo, and he used stage technology, mirror projections from the 19th century, particularly prominent in France. And so people, visitors of the show, would go onto this spot, and once you've had entered this spot, you were projected into that street scene from London. Luca Foccucci was also spent a year in the life, just to remind me and tell you, it's not all about vision and touch. echo and sound, also very important. So Luca is a sound artist, a Swiss sound artist, and he also explored this idea of interoceptive representations that also Isabella was interested in, so breathing and heartbeat rhythms. And he actually developed here at I think Archizoom, it was exposed at the time, that he also designed a sound space where certain bodily sounds of the visitors were live recorded, and you could discover them at certain spatial parts of the exposition. So again, a little bit of science here. This was based on much work that we had done. I don't know if this animation will work, but you can see similar illusions like before, but here we don't even need to apply touch. We can take biosignals from the visitor, like the heartbeat or the breathing, and we can project them in the halo and other forms around the avatar. And again, similar recalibrations of the self occur, or similar doubling of the self occurs. And again, this is our day-to-day business, normally what we do, trying to detect which kind of brain signals are involved in this. Second to last project that I want to present is the most recent one, together with the Hochschule der Künste in Zurich, particularly Daniel Bisik's a fantastic work. So he has worked a lot with dancers and virtual reality, how it can be brought to those moving bodies. So in addition to vision and touch, sound, we also bring here now movement, which of course is a very important part in the bodily self. And this is just one of the stills. So this was the 50-year anniversary here at EPFL. So these are semi-transparent screens that have surrounded individuals. There were also several people who could be involved. And what you can see here, we played with different forms of delays between what the visitors were doing and could experience and the feedback signal. So everything that you see in these halo-like shadows is actually live recorded and processed with a simple but important topic from everything that I presented. All the illusions that I presented to do, when the touch I feel is shown synchronously, the illusions I presented to you occur, and there's a doubling of the self. If there's a delay, or if it's shifted to the wrong position, then all these illusions do not occur, and there is no doubling or integration of self. This is the last project, my last slide. So this is an ongoing project which basically started a year ago. We're very interested to bring yet another domain to science, technology, and art, if you want. It's meditation and contemplative practice. A key climax or key component of meditation is an attainment of self-realization, of the impermanence of the self. We think much meditation has focused rather on mindfulness, which goes to this cognitive self that I started with at the beginning. What we're interested in, the more deeper states of meditation, linking some of the illusions that I presented to you and embed them directly into the meditation practice, hence realizing the impermanence of the body, not just by mental practice, but also by being exposed almost in a cyber-physical setting into a dissociated way and creating a distance between you and the self in order to realize what it is. Selves have never existed. Myself doesn't exist. It's not a thing in the world. It's a subjective experience that my brain is generating. And I think meditation is another way, an old way, that helps us realize this without science, without technology, and without art. But it's a long process for most. So what our goal is here, to even allow novices to reach deeper, interesting states in meditation. Thank you.
Next speaker is, please welcome Adrian Ionescu. Adrian is a professor here at EPFL. He's the director of the Nano-Electronic Devices Laboratory. And yeah, he has just literally published hundreds of research articles and journal articles, and has received various prizes for his groundbreaking work in nanotechnology. And he'll be talking about digital twins and how they can influence our health. Thank you very much.
Good morning. So you'll see a presentation that is more focused on engineering, and I will let you find more connectivity to the art part. So I'm going to talk to you about this concept of digital twin and how to extend it to humans and to healthcare. And in this context, let me give you just some simple highlights. What are digital twins? Is a technology among the many digital technologies that we are developing today. And as a definition, people think about functional digital replicas of a system of systems in which you are able not only to mimic the functioning of a system, but also predict how it will behave during the lifetime, including maintenance, including unexpected events, including end of life, and take the right action in order to maintain them. And this is the reason the industry was extremely interested. There will be no aircraft, no car today without digital twin, in which you can experience many of the events that you would like to prevent and take action on it. And the important part is that all the time you confront this model with the reality by collecting data. So it involves a lot of sensory part that collects the data and again, bridging reality to model. More recently, there were entire big cities like the Singapore that are building, you know, this type of digital twins of the city, of the transportation, of energy distribution, quality of air, in order to take the best management decision. And sometime when you want to take a decision among many, you can see the predicted effect of your decision. So that's the interesting thing. So you will find recently as well Nature publication showing that all the 17 United Nations sustainable goals are addressed by specific digital twins, showing their advantages. And industry is doing this currently for production in order to improve the production, for processes if you want, and also for improving the performance. So this is something that is adopted by industry currently, and it's extending to many directions. So why this is a powerful concept and what are the expectations? So as I was saying before, the most important thing is about understanding what is happening in the real world and being able to quantify and put it in a model of a certain level of complexity. And the expectation of a digital twin is this part, using these two to predict. And of course, prediction involves certain risk, certain evaluation of the accuracy of the prediction, but it's still very, very useful in order to make the best scenario for the planet. And this is the reason today we have climate digital twin for the whole Earth that is collecting all the data that you have from satellite, data at the level of the Earth that you collect with sensor, and you predict weather, and these predictions are better and better. And the question is how much and can we extend this concept as well to something even more complex where we see unsustainable problem like the human. I want also to add some information here on this slide about how technology is addressing and connects to this type of concept. And this is a typical graph in which I try to depict the cognitive level of a technology versus the different level of what can be called artificial intelligence, narrow, distributed, collective, and generalized. Having at the left bottom what we call today smart sensor. These are sensors in which practically we sense information in our environment, we transform it and we process it digitally, and then we resend it to the cloud for decision making. Now, in the future, we'd like to do more and more function at the sensor level and have local intelligent control, recognition, and actuation, making less use of the cloud for reasons that are related to sustainability in energy consumption and data proliferation. As a next step, we are thinking of concepts like fully autonomous systems in which decision-making starts to be taken more and more at the level of the system, and these digital twins could be part of this, right? Even though today they are rather used in order to support the decision. And this will come with innovation in technology that are related also to systems that are not performing only in the traditional way, digital computing, but they are bio-inspired system that we call neuromorphic, system in which you can take into account stochasticity, so probabilistic type of computing. And at the end, maybe we'll come towards the end of the sensory with something that could be a full conscious artificial system. Many questions there. Why we want to apply this in healthcare? As I said, this is a huge challenge, and the reason is on the left. For hundreds of years, we are practically doing something that is reactive healthcare. And even in the 20th century, the reactive healthcare is the reality in which even we start to use technology, we go to the medical doctor when we are sick. And you see that with this type of approach, today we are nearly 20% of the GDP of US used in healthcare, and the projections show that this can go up to 97% by the end of this century. So roughly, the cost of healthcare is higher by 2 to 2.5% than the one of the increase of the GDP over the last 50, 60 years. So it's really unsustainable, and we have to go to something that is called proactive healthcare, in which we try to detect much earlier the onset of a disease and address it in a stage where that is not chronic, and it gives better outcome, better quality of life. And digital twin are the vehicle to do that. Because in the same time, digital twin can bridge what we create in the labs of medical knowledge and confront this with the application in the hospital. So it's a way in which you can test a therapy on your twin before applying or choosing the right therapy for the human. So this is really something that we expect to change the sustainability of the healthcare, but it will require huge investment in the infrastructure and also in the technology we need to use. Let me give you some example in a what-if manner about the advantages that can result from that. People are saying that with digital twin we may offer healthcare by default, making more enjoyable and rewarding the living. Why is that? Because avoiding chronic state, this is related, the most critical state of a disease in which there is a low quality of life, pain, etc. So it means that we'll be able to intercept by looking at a dynamic fingerprint corresponding to a certain disease, its trajectory, much before this chronic state. Other advantage, in many cases, having such a tool will allow massive reduction to medical errors. We can, based on the specific model that we have for a patient that is personalized, avoid adverse drug effect. And a simplified version of a digital twin can be today in our pocket because we have enough computation power at what we call the edge in order to have simplified model that can look at our health like a guardian angel. So, lot of expectation. I want to give you in a very simple figure how and what is needed to achieve that. Again, the same concept as it was mentioned before, connecting the real world with the virtual world through data collection. And this data collection can be of multiple kinds. So it was mentioned also in a previous talk that we are confronting in cyber-physical system with data of completely different format, of completely different time response. And when you are looking at a digital twin that is used in healthcare, it involves not only the genomic information, but it will involve also things that, information that is sensed in real time, which means the exposome, the intake that we have daily as food, as air, quality of air, water, stress, etc. So we'll have to be able to put together all this data. This data is going to be somewhere in a middleware, in a data platform for data storage and data processing, and models that are related to a disease trajectory or to the organ dysfunction or to comorbidities between different diseases are expected to be developed. We are not yet there, but there are a number of models and digital twins that today are used by people. I can give you some examples. Philips and Medtronic are using digital twin for the heart. And even during the intervention, you have certain type of decision support with digital twin. We are developing digital twins for certain progression of inflammatory disease and, for instance, for cytokine storms in COVID patients. So it will need also, very importantly, in the virtual part, visualization inside and a way for the medical doctor to be able to look at all this complex data and use it. And this is a very big challenge because today the data we collect is very little used in hospital. And using different type of visualization and virtual reality interfaces, as it was shown by my colleague, is very, very important. So now what we experience in recent years is that we move more and more intelligence to the edge of the cloud, right into the IoT nodes, to make them more autonomous. And this is giving us this possibility of putting kind of simplified version of this digital twin for specific diseases, let's say for a metabolic or cardiovascular disease in the pocket of the people. And just very small highlights about the project we are running at EPFL called DigiPredict. We are looking specifically at a digital fingerprint based on dynamic of biomarker. So there are certain specific biomarker in our blood, but here we are not looking at the blood, we are looking at the interstitial fluid that we can access under our skin with wearable in order to be able to detect what is called a cytokine storm onset. So you can pay more attention to the human that is somewhere in an emergency service in the ICU among many others and pick the ones that are more exposed to such cytokine storms. And just to give you an example here, this is a type of very nice wearable device that you can put on the upper arm that includes a number of layers, very tiny needles that you do not feel. They are micro needles that will extract your interstitial fluid, will bring it into a fluidic in which you have sensor and the digital interface. And for instance, after doing this extraction, for 4 patients here, we are monitoring the time series of lactate concentration. And lactate is a predictor in the emergency room of the outcome of a patient. So we can do lactate and we can now do certain type of protein like C-reactive protein in real time monitored. And we are just starting to build this equivalent digital twins of disease progression for people. So again, what it needs the merging of some key future technology like AI, edge or cloud, and if it's edge, you need to have this Internet of Things node and practically extended visualization. Sorry, here it's a small type, extended visualization of the data in this space that is multi-parametric and in which you have to understand exactly what is the specific fingerprint of a typical disease. Thank you, I'll stop here.
So, as I mentioned, Jobin is not with us today. He is a contemporary artist, a dance choreographer based in Geneva, and his work is regularly featured in festivals and at institutions around the world, such as the Sundance Film Festival, the Venice Film Festival, the Music Center of Los Angeles. Now, what is specific to his work is that in 2016, his company embarked into the exploration of detecting or exploring motion, dance motion digitally. So he set up a motion capture lab in his studio, And we actually, here at Yinan, have been able to collaborate in a small project with him together, together with a dance company in Melbourne called Brown Dances. And it is really quite interesting how he is able to bring the dancer, the body, into the cyberspace, into the metaverse. And in this case, it was two dance groups operating together with each other, one in Melbourne and one based here in Geneva. So, yeah, we are very much looking forward to the performance tomorrow. And I believe we've got a 1-minute video that might give a short intro or a short snippet on his work. Now please welcome to the stage Professor Matthias Kohler, who is Professor for Architecture and Digital Fabrication at ETH. He is the co-founder of the architecture research group Kohler Research. Now, I mean, what can I say? He has just shaped the field around, he has shaped the field around robotics, robotic fabrication in architecture. The list of projects he has done fills pages, and so do the awards. He has recently become the dean of the prestigious architecture school at ETH. Yeah, very much looking forward to the presentation. Thanks, Matthias, for coming.
Okay, great. Yeah, pleasure to be here on this fantastic symposium. Thanks for the invitation. Let me rewind a little bit, go a few years into the past when we started our research on robotic fabrication at the Department of Architecture at ETH Zurich. Very early on, we took this picture, or more concretely, the artist Gilles Spinach took this picture of our first collaborator, Mike, who is still working with us, our laboratory technician and currently head of the robotic fabrication lab, and our first robot, which we bought in 2005. And so I think the picture is emblematic for our work, and it's interesting because the question here is, who is actually controlling whom, right? Is the robot actually, or all the automation techniques that we're using, in control of us, or are we indeed driving these machines and these processes? Of course, we would like to believe so, but I think there's a certain ambivalence and also creativity in the relationship between humans and machines. Let me rewind even earlier to the year 2002, to a little project which we did in our architecture office before we became professors. This was 5 years before the iPhone came on the market. What you see is a Nokia phone, Symbian. Some of you might recall this. It was one of the first programmable mobile phones, and we did a little project which enabled you to basically design a customized table on your mobile phone with a little app. At that point in time, it wasn't named like this yet. And here is what it looked like. Basically, with your thumb, you can move a cursor and you could push with your thumb, and by pushing, you could create holes in the table And then you could select the dimensions of the table, the color of the table. You saw it in a 3D interface on that little mobile phone. And then the data of your design was sent to a server. The data is very short. This is the data. It's the name of the author, the color, the dimensions, and the 7 pressure points, basically the coordinates where you pushed and how much you pushed. So it was basically a recording of your physical action. And then it was simply recreated, this complex doubly curved surface on the server side to be the data for the production for a CNC mill, which then basically transferred your physical actions into this milling out of timber surface, which then created these tables with very distinct features. You see here this edge, very thin edge. You see these holes as a kind of a negative decoration in the table. And so we started to close the loop and started to understand the mobile phone as an interface, right, between the human and the physical world. I think it shows 2 aspects. One, our early interest about the physicality of the world and how we could interact with that physicality, being architects. And at that time in the office, actually not having a commission to build, so we needed to do something else. But also it showed us how we could design maybe not only singular objects, but how we could design systems and how these design systems could enable a multitude of objects to emerge from it, and how it invited, how these systems could also invite people to participate in the design, so in a way to enable co-designs of objects. Nice ending of this little story is the first version of this table is now in the Vitra permanent collection. So after a few years, almost before it got thrown away, they were actually interested and said, maybe you could give us one of these early experiments. Now, if we fast forward to the more recent past, we've done a lot of works. Maybe some of you know the works with digital fabrication. So basically engaging in computational design of architecture and using primarily robotic fabrication, additive fabrication, like here you see, for example, this brick facade of a winery, collaboration with Berthe Platz's architects, which was robotically built. Or here you see the roof of our institute building at ETH Zurich, which was robotically assembled from 50,000 individually cut timber slats. So we've done a lot of larger projects where we try to exemplify what we're researching. We've also done installations. But one particular part of our research also addresses these a bit more tricky materials and material systems. Like here, for example, you see sand. You know, that's a material which is not so easy to actually predict, right? It's kind of, the material computes by itself, right? If you deposit it, it has certain aggregation features. And so we were always interested also in these, let's say, non-geometric or non-initially simple geometric assemblies. And so I would like to show you one project which links into this, and I think into the topic of sensing and extending in a way the possibilities in architectural construction. So here it's about building with these really huge gneiss boulders, or alternatively with concrete waste. So material that is at abundance, you get it everywhere. It's in a way what we built with in the past, but we should learn how to build with these partially waste materials or natural materials in the future. It's also about thinking about the future aesthetic, where maybe, you know, newly sourced materials, locally sourced materials, and materials from build back of buildings are combined and create another material expression of future architecture to come. But how do you build with this, and how do you build with this more specifically with robots? Well, first of all, you immediately need to gain a digital understanding of the building material that you have in front of you, because these objects are not easily stackable. So you actually, in this project, which we did together with the robotics group of Marco Hutter at ETH Zurich, we scanned the rocks after picking them up. We analyzed them, and given the features of their more or less of the surface, we try to find out, well, where could these rocks actually fit? And this gives you a decision framework where actually an operator of this system decides on the spot, well, which of the possible placements would actually be most ideal for the next placing. So the wall that you see here, it's an 80-meter long wall, is autonomously assembled by a robot. You see there's no driver in the cabin, but the decision making is prepared also by a computational process, and the decision itself, which rock you actually take and which rock you actually place, is taken by a human. So the human is actually in the loop, but detached from the actual building process. So you see how the human gets in another position than it previously was. So we see here this first robotically assembled wall. But what if the human is more directly engaged? We had the chance to build another winery project. This one is in Greece. The client asked us, could we have a building like the Gantenbein winery, the winery which you saw previously? We love this project so much, could we have the same? And we said, well, we don't replicate our projects. These are also research driven. Also, it wouldn't make much sense to robotically build brick walls in Switzerland, then transport them to Greece in order to have such a project copied in a way. Also, socially, it doesn't make sense, knowing the local craftsmanship and the economic conditions in Greece. But we said there might be other options. Maybe we augment the human to enable the human to build such a piece. And here is some research from our PhD, Daniela Mittelberger. That was her first project, a bit a tough start in her PhD, but a good one. So basically what you see here is that the humans are augmented by this technology, where basically one senses how a brick is laid, and one learns from the craft of the brickman. So here the brickmans do this fine adjustment of the brick positions by tapping onto these bricks. Now, if you learn from this, you can actually give very precise instructions. You see these little red arrows on the screen, on which edge to tap, how much, in order to shift a brick in an exact position. And so, with a group of local Greek craftsmen, this building could be finished on site. So here, in a sense, these digital technologies become an enabler for transferring crafts, or in this project, design intent, to the craftsman. But would it be possible to directly design on site? Of course, this is the ultimate dream, right? We're directly engaged in the production process of architecture. There is several reasons why this might not be very practical with architecture and with certain standards that architecture must fulfill. But there's still a question, how tight could this loop be closed? And here in this project, which we did with students, the students actually had a tool where they could design on site directly in this space. They could design how robotic movements would be executed, basically slightly before the robot would come there and execute them. So they would design on-site collectively. There were a group of 20 students. They would negotiate who would design on which day and how they would proceed the next day with the information. And they would see the robot execute and learn from the execution of the robot for their ongoing design. In a way, it's a bit of an academic exercise. As I said, this is hard to realize in architectural practice, but I'm also sure there will be application areas of such on-site and direct engagement of participants on the construction site. Last but not least, another form of human-machine interaction is this project which we recently finished. It's called Semiramis. It's a vertical urban garden, an urban garden that that humans cannot access, so only non-humans can fly or crawl and grow up there. For the design, what was important for us is to look at environmental parameters in a very simplified manner. You see here how much sun comes onto these planters, how much rain falls onto these planters, and how large these planters are. These were the basic characteristics. And we learned on 500,000 of randomly generated structures on how we could reverse the design process. That's very fundamental for architectural design. Can we design from environmental parameters forward to a design solution? And here is how that looked on the screen. So here you see, for example, one, I think the movie is not running. Doesn't seem to run. Well, we will see a little bit of that. But basically, you could design in real time your parameters, and the system would give you proposals because it had learned the relationship between these environmental parameters and the execution and the shape directly from the system. Then we built this robotically. This video summarizes it, so in that sense I can maybe talk to this a little bit. So here's the final project. So this is this design project. So basically we discussed what parameters would be interesting, and then the system would propose as design solutions. So it's a reverse design process, and we would start to discover the criteria which we in the end selected to choose from an unlimited amount of design possibilities. Afterwards, there were also optimization techniques, because this was built from flat panels with a certain maximal size and weight. That's another sub-project. There is a bit of a PR movie here. And we could look at this structure always in our immersive design lab. We could also take different perspectives on a large screen. And then the fabrication would happen by collaborative robotic project with 4 robots. So here basically these 4 robots would drive these individually cut plates to their final spatial location. So there was a minimal amount of formwork needed. Every one of these planters could be unique. Every piece here was unique, and they were just basically brought to their spatial location. And then in a human-machine collaboration, the human actually filled the gaps with special glue that enables the forces to actually transfer between these plates. You can see that here. And like this, basically these complex shells were assembled with a relatively small effort, but with quite a bit of technology in the loop. This is a visualization of the final structure. Of course, now it's growing, it's changing over the season, so this is still a bit sparsely vegetated because this is just newly planted, but it's growing quite nicely. Good, with this, basically, I'm at the end. I tried to show you how we're interested not only in the humans and the machines, but in this relation, but also in the matter and how it comes together in the design processes. And in the end, this is an exciting journey to see where how the culture of design will change and transform with these new technologies.
Thank you very much again for your presentation and the variety presented here. I'll open the Q&A session. Do we have any questions from the audience directly?
Thank you. So I have one for each of you. So maybe I will just start by one, and maybe the most fresh one with Matthias Kohler. Thank you very much for the lovely presentation. I was wondering, because all of your project is really super far away ahead, like we can see into most of the architecture groups in academia. But then arrives the world of construction that may be limited by other logical aspects. What would be the difficult point of this kind of project to be then translated into everyday use, into the construction of building into an urban setting?
Test. Okay, works. Well, I mean, in general, the building industry is, of course, quite risk averse. So I would say since we started, it transformed a lot. Maybe, 10, 15 years ago, the building industry was not very keen to get into digitalization, and I think that changed quite a bit. So now, particularly due to the hype of 3D printing architecture, this kind of sparked a fear or a hype or the potential of these technologies for many, although there is a bit of over-promising there, and it's also partially problematic due to high CO2 content of cementitious 3D printing processes, but that's a side note. But I think we can see that now also the construction sector is looking into digital technologies very actively. To give you an example of this, for example, we founded a spin-off called Mesh, which looks basically at robotically built formworks, which you can then fill with concrete without any external formwork, so the reinforcement becomes the formwork itself. That was supported by a company that builds formwork, and so we proposed to eliminate the formwork, and they say, okay, we want to be in this business, although they themselves create formwork. So I think there is a transformation. That's for one point. The other thing is, with the robotic technologies and automation, where we started our research, there is still quite a gap of knowledge. These companies would need to change basically their business models and their knowledge fields quite drastically to install such larger machines, etc. So there is quite a threshold to go there. Some industries, like the timber industry, are quite close. They don't need to make such big gaps, but other industries, traditional builders, are quite far away. There, I think augmented technologies, extended reality, actually help to bridge very directly, because you can just augment humans and transfer crafts. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think I have a question to Adrian. You talked about machine learning, did you? Yes, you did. What way do machines learn in comparison to how we learn? Do they learn?
Yeah. Indeed, in my presentation of digital twin, we were specifying on the modeling part that machine learning is part of the approach concerning the algorithm software. I'm not myself a specialist of machine learning. I am rather a nanotechnologist. Now, we have to be a bit careful because, of course, people identify and make smaller and smaller the gap between what we call an AI and machine learning. So finally, machine learning is kind of a technique in which, based on an existing experience, you are able to interpolate or extrapolate certain, let's say, prediction based on the space in which you have trained your model. So it's very important. There are two things. Very important on, I think, on the quality of the data on which you train, because many people neglect so much this, and they said, okay, we can train on large data set and we are going to have very good prediction and result. And in healthcare, it does not work like that, because you need really also high quality data and deep data that is very relevant for what you want to predict. Second thing, and this is maybe the aspect to which you refer, what is the difference between this, some of the machine learning and how we learn, in my interpretation again as nanotechnologist, is the interpretability of machine learning. So we have to do more in the future in this field, interpretable machine learning. So to be able to understand and couple machine learning with physical models and understanding. And if there is from this machine learning type of training of a neural network, for instance, that we want to do certain type of insight and prediction, be able to interpret what is the physical meaning of that. And this is what I think we need very badly also in the medical domain, in many domains, to do more interpretable machine learning connected to the physical models, and not just to have a blind training on a data set that will be too dependent on our data set. Not sure if I fully, but humans are able to interpret what they learn, how they apply and find the insight. Is not yet all the case with all types of, but machine learning is doing also, to my knowledge, a lot of progress in this field, and we try to connect the two. So it's also a question of, let's go further. You know, there is certain hype in what we call today AI. It's not yet the AI that, this is the reason I put it, many people, they put it much further in the future, right? But let's take the medical domain. In medical domain, if you have a very well-trained machine learning to find a certain tumor in a data set, it may find this particular feature without error faster and better than a human, right? It's a tool. It's a tool that you can use complementary to your expertise to help you identifying feature that you cannot process this amount of data with your head.
Thanks. This is a question for Olaf. With your laboratory, you've had a very extensive engagement with artists over time. And I'm often asked this question, and usually it's people in funding bodies who say, oh yes, we understand what the artist gets out of this process. What does the scientist get? And being able to articulate this for funding bodies actually is a really serious question. And so I wondered if you had some elegant one-liners.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it's a tough question. It's a tough and easy one, I think, at the same time. If the scientist is interested in art, I think then it's an easy one, and I think it's a joint exploration, I think, which defines success. If it's just a visualization of what great stuff we've done in the scientific lab and our discoveries, right? That's not interesting for the artist, and that's actually not really interesting. Shouldn't be really interesting for the scientist as well. So I have a feeling that the topic is relevant, right? If it's about the visitor, spectator, or the subject or participant, and how, so the self is a topic that is of interest, and maybe this, you know, scientists, particularly if you work in psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, I think medical research can take a lot of inspiration from how artists approach a certain problem. Like, again, it's this Bruce Nauman example I gave, for example, right? I mean, there's something in there that he explored also in his video sculptures of himself. So he seems, you know, if I look at this, I seem to be quite obsessed with understanding the self and the brain. But this is, as I said, not a new project, but he approached it through technology, which hadn't been done before. And I think there's many similarities, which initially by chance, we used maybe similar things than he did, right? This idea that you can never reach your image at the end of this very narrow, very physical corridor and so forth. And I think art is filled with those examples, particularly art, the contemporary art, right? Because I can look at paintings and fine, and that's a different kind of inspiration. But there, I think the art of today is very close of what scientists are interested in as well. And it's not, of course, not just AI, and it's many domains. So I think you have to find the right person. There has to be a topic that inherently is not solved, neither by either side. And I guess nothing is ever solved, whether in art or in science anyways. But I think it's this collaboration. And then for the scientists, of course, it's also not easy to see how a realization in the art world has been done on the technology side. What is the experience? That can, of course, be extremely variable, but how can you transfer that to an actual experiment? But I think it's in the end about creativity, whether you do science or whether you do art, and I think there's really so much done. So no easy answer, really, but I think it's important. I think true science and true art happens when those domains actually come together. But it's not easy, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, yeah.
That was really fascinating. I actually have a question, Olaf, for you. I was very interested in the discussion of AI as a kind of, that there's a sort of threshold around embodiment or a threshold around the physical manifestation of the manipulation of data. And Olaf, the question I have for you in some ways builds on that, which has to do with how is it possible to separate self-perception from perception of, let's say, a collective body?
Super question, right? I mean, I think the brain in the end will not make a big difference. So these avatar experiments that I showed, normally this body should be really special for my brain, right? Because for X number of years, it has been constantly representing that information. Now, the avatar experiments we showed is in 1 or 2 minutes of relatively simple manipulations, there can be a change to this decade-long representation. An avatar, like the Narcissus kind of visual representation, is a first other body of myself, which overlaps with your body, with Sarah's body, and with all the other bodies here. So the brain, there were these mirror neurons, I think 20 years ago, quite a hype around, not like today about AI, about so-called mirror neurons, which did not discriminate, again, your body and my body, my brain seeing your body and feeling my body. There seem to be certain neurons which are active the same way, whether my brain sees your body or my brain represents my own body. So the social collective element you mentioned, I think we saw it also in this dance video together, which would have been amazing to have him here. I think the brain will be able to integrate this somehow. So we have worked, other data that I couldn't present is how can we embody several avatars at the same time? The answer is yes. Can I embody 2 left arms very easily, right? So the brain, as long as it makes sense, meaning that if I move or if I give a command of my left arm to move and I see 7 left arms move, my brain will embody them. And we've worked with, it's always easier with fingers than with supernumerary bodies. So we studied a Brazilian family it's a family where like half of the family members have 12 toes and 12 fingers. So one is a goalkeeper, very, very good in Brazil, which is important in Brazil, and he's also very good in computer gaming. As you can imagine, he has this extra finger, and it's a fully functional finger. And now for us as a neuroscientist, it was interesting to see where is that finger in the brain, because we know where, let's say, our 5 fingers are. And so he had this second index and in this position, and in the brain it was exactly where you predict this would be added. So it was in between the real, like my index and the thumb. So I would imagine that our brain has the capacity, if linked, with AI and robotics. So for rehabilitation, robotics is a big topic as well. If you have an amputated, a prosthetic limb, how can we make that limb feel like a real limb? And so the answer would be yes, I think that should be possible depending on the links that are created between perception and what the brain is exposed to.
I have another question for Dr. Ionescu. From a public health perspective, I think we have ample evidence that most people become sick and die due to socioeconomic variables, access to unsafe water, malnutrition, work stress, and so forth. So my question is, why the focus on the individual body? And maybe to all of the panel, is AI destined to trap us even further in the concept of individuality?
Yes. As such, presented, it's clear that infrastructure for deploying this concept of digital twin will be extremely expensive and affordable initially only by very rich Western countries, right? And it's really a problem of ethics of deployment. However, we experience, if you look today at how the system works, first, it's a reality that this reactive healthcare is unsustainable. And if you look even at the drug efficiency, they have very, very little efficiency. They are developed as generic drug. But if you go to the effect, how effective these drugs are, in which a drug development can cost billions or tens of billions. And then you look how efficient when you deploy it, and the efficiency is very, very low. You'll find efficiency less than 20, 25% in many drugs when you prescribe it in a way that is, based on statistics. And the personalization acknowledges that we are all different, and maybe there is something also beyond medication that could be also related to simple things like lifestyles or certain type of having to do with what we eat, with what we have as physical activities. So digital twin will be a technology that goes beyond drug prescription and intervention. And this, I think, it can touch at a social level much larger, and maybe there are cases where you will not need, if you understand exactly the mechanism related to early detection, and a combination in which the treatment and this behavioral change can be put in the feedback loop, can somehow address some of your concern. Second thing, of course, you are learning also by from donating your data. The data of each patient has a certain value, and we understand practically from what I know from my medical doctor colleagues, it's very valuable as well to look not only at the first two P, personalized, preventive, but also on that there is another P that is called participatory. So maybe in the future there will be model in which you can somehow, by the insurance or by certain recognition of the value of the data of the patient, reward the citizen on the patient on the data and learn from this data. So it's a combination between personalization and prevention, but also with the P that is participatory healthcare, which is, I think it's, maybe I neglected to mention it too much in my talk. So it's a complex discussion. It's a complex discussion as well about, let's say, who owns finally the data, where this, because there is a big diversity between the model of healthcare between different countries, privacy of the data, for what other purposes this data can be used against ourselves. So there is a huge discussion, but this should happen at a certain, let's say, rate in the future and adoption, because simply with what we have today, we see is not anymore sustainable. I don't have a better answer than that, and I think it's a really multidisciplinary discussion that goes between biologist, engineer, medical doctor, and also people in social sciences, ethics, and so on. It is complex, very, very complex question to be answered. Yeah.
Just a quick comment. I mean, I'm not an expert in healthcare, but I think in general, from my personal point of view, you know, all these technologies, for me, I look at them as part of our human culture. So I actually try to, let's say, not separate them. Let's say, okay, you know, we are inventing them, we're working with them, with all the problem that creates, and we will be using them like clothes or other, you know, kind of developments. And this entanglement from our cultures will not be possible. So how do we include it, go towards it? That's why we started working with the robot, etc., on a rather creative side in the beginning. But of course, there's also more economic and socially impactful sides, and there's commercial exploitation and all the consequences of that. So I would say then, if you look at these technologies from a cultural perspective, then it's also a question, okay, with what attitude you do this? For example, can you develop technologies, you know, on an open source platform, you know, so they're not protected, they're transparent in how they're working, etc. So I think there is a cultural evolution with this technological evolution which needs to happen.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we are going over time now, so there were more questions, but we are having a coffee break now, so the speakers might be still around to answer some questions directly.
I want to add something to your question, what we are learning from now. And surprisingly, I want to tell you that everyone talks about digitalization, use of digital technologies and digital art and so on. I mean, what we try to do now in computation and technology is exactly the opposite, going analog. So it may sound very surprisingly for everyone that promotes digitalization of everything, but the only way to go energy efficient, if you would look at what nature is doing, and we are taking I take this small example of the honeybee. So a honeybee is not trained when you have a honeybee that is on the data set, but knows when it's born to fly, recognize a flower, right? Land on the flower, consuming 1 million times less energy of our best cyber-physical system. And why is that? All the processing of all the information is in the analog domain. There is no 0 and 1. And I think art is doing the same. It's not 0 and 1. And I think the future will be back to analog.
Thank you very much, Adrian.